Hello everyone. Welcome to our API series. This series consists of 4 lessons where we will introduce you the concept of API, why exactly BAs need to understand APIs, and how can they contribute in the project by having this additional knowledge of API. It will also tell you how exactly you will complete your API documentation even though you do not have any technical knowledge. So the lessons are very simplified. So even if you are a functional business analyst, don't worry, you will be able to understand APIs end to end. So this is lesson number 2 of API. So if you have not watched lesson number 1, click on the link in the description box and watch the lesson number 1 and then come to lesson 2 because lesson 2 is a continuation of lesson 1. In lesson 2, we are going to discuss about the components of API. So before that, you need to know what is an API and then understand the components. So click on the link in the description box and go to lesson 1, finish lesson 1 and then come to lesson 2. So here we are on the second session of API, that is the components of API. Okay. So each of these recordings, remember, will be arranged in a sequence one after the other. That's the reason I'm doing it as a separate recording. So components of API is something that we are going to discuss now. And be very attentive, take notes so that you can understand this even later after the class is over. You'll have something to refer to. Otherwise, you'll have to watch the recordings once again. Okay, let me bring up the slide. I hope my screen is visible to everybody. So what are the components of API? These are the different components that you should be knowing that an API has. And I'll give you examples so that it becomes clearer. Endpoint URL. Just take down notes. There's something called as an endpoint URL. URL for the API, to call the API. Then we have methods. Methods, the examples of methods are given here in the bracket. It can be get method, post, put, or delete. We have request parameters. Okay. Something called as request parameters through which request is sent to the other application. Whatever information that you're requesting for, that request is sent using request parameters. And then we have the response that we receive. So it's like, you have to visualize application A, application B. Application A requests for some information and application B sends a response back. So that's the request response parameters. Okay. So remember these 4 components, very important. Okay. URL, method, request, and response. First example, weather API. Now the scenario is there's a travel app who wants to show today's weather details. And there is an API called as weather API that will provide this information. Okay. Now take a look at this. I explained you the 4 components that you should be aware of, right? For this weather API, there is a endpoint URL given by the developer. And we are calling the method get because we are asking for data, right? So weather API wants to send a request to the other application requesting for data. And what is the data that it is requesting for? It is requesting for data for the city Mumbai. And it's also sending information in terms of units. Units is metric. So it wants information in a particular format. Okay. So the request parameters always will contain those filter criteria that has to be applied. Okay, so when we are asking for information, we'll ask information based on specific parameters, right? Now, once the other application receives the request, it will create a response. Now, this response is in the form of a JSON file. JSON is a language and it generates a JSON file like this, which contains the information that it has, that the application A has asked for. So it says, okay, city is Mumbai, and for Mumbai city, the temperature is 30, description of that is cloudy. So whatever is the response that the developer has coded for, all of that response will go filtered based on the two parameters that it asked for, the city and the units. Okay. So this is just like querying a database, by the way. In the database also, when suppose you go to Amazon website and you search for a particular product, you enter, say, laptop, you have put in the name of the product, right? So you put you in the search engine, what it does it is it takes the name of the product and queries the database using the product name. So all the laptops will be displayed to you, will not be displayed any other product. So just like a database search works, similarly, you have to think about how an API works. Here, the difference between the database call is that when you're querying the database, it's your own application's database. So you write SQL queries to query a database. You write SQL queries because that's your own database and you can freely query it. But when you want information from somebody else's application, it's not your application. You want information from somebody else's application, then you need to call their APIs. For example, in my website, if I want to integrate Google Maps, I just can't do integration on my own just like that. I will have to contact the Google team and they will provide me APIs on a subscription fee. Okay. So for all these APIs that are provided by different service providers, there is a subscription fee attached to it. So Google, whichever companies are using Google Maps, they are paying Google a specific amount as subscription fees, due to which they can use their Google Maps. Okay. So the companies pay the owner of the API a specific subscription fee, and they can use the API. And once you have subscribed to their APIs, they will give you complete details how to call their API and everything. And the structure that I'm showing you is exactly the structure that you should know when you document the API. Is that making sense, guys? Type yes in the chat box if that makes sense. So don't confuse with a database query and an API. See, the database you can query using SQL. SQL is a query language and it's your own database, so you don't need anybody else's permission to query it. But if if you want data from somebody else's application, then you have to use APIs, right? So this is the weather API part of it. Example. Now, let's understand what BAs should note. Let me keep this also open. I explained you for weather API what you have to be aware of: endpoint, the method, the request, and the response. The BAs should note that the input required here for the response to be generated, the main input that's required is the name of the city. The output received from this API is city, temperature, weather description. So a requirement sample that you as a BA can write to cover this API. Suppose, for example, you are writing documentation for this weather API. The sample requirement will be: system shall fetch current weather details, temperature description from weather API using city name. That's a sample way in which you can write. You can, of course, use your own wordings. As far as it matches this, it is not a problem. It's not that you have to word to word write this, but I'm just giving you an example here that the system shall fetch current weather details. So you start with the response that you will receive and what exactly will be the input. You end with that. Now, example number 2, this should be example number 2. Okay. Place order API. Now this is post request. Just remember, I'm showing you two types of request. Whether API was get request, where you are getting some information. Okay, you send one parameter as city, and you're getting information about that city, that weather information about the city. So that's the reason it is called get API. Place order is a post API. Now, what is a post API? Here, a customer places an order in an e-commerce app, just like you go to Amazon and you place an order over there. The system needs to send the order details to the server. Okay, that's why it's called post. Take a look at this. So here again, you will have an endpoint URL. Every API has that. The method used here is post. In the previous, it was get. Okay. Here it is post because we are sending data. As a customer, the order that you have placed, that data should go in their main order management system. So that's why post. Now the request body here, the request parameters here will contain the customer ID, to whom the order belongs, and the items that he purchased, and the payment method. He used credit card or debit card, whatever. This goes as request parameters. And the response received is the order ID that is generated by the system, auto-generated. The status also comes back via the API, whether it's confirmed, and the estimated delivery date. Okay, this is the response that's generated. Now, in this case, as a BA, again, the same things have to be noted, but here they have elaborated it further. Input needed, of course, is the customer ID, item details, payment method. Output received is the order ID, status, and the estimated delivery timeline. Now, requirement sample to cover this API. A requirement sample to cover this API would be: system shall send order details, which is customer ID, product list, payment method, to the order API. The API will return the order ID, status, and estimated delivery date. Very simple to write. Very simple, as simple. What is the data that is sent and what is the data that is returned? That should come in your requirement sample statement. Okay. So when BAs, for the first time, when they look at these JSON files, they get a little overwhelmed thinking that, oh, this is technical. Why are we doing technical documentation? There is nothing technical in it, guys. If you understand what is request and how you need to document it in a plain, simple language. You see, here, nobody is going to ask you to write a JSON file. These JSON files are generated by the development team. Okay. But in order for your documentation, they will give you the copy of the JSON file so that you can look at it and you can write the documentation. So when you look at the JSON file, it will look like this. That's why I've given this sample. So you should be, when you see the request, you understand, okay, it's requesting for information. It's sending a particular set of information and posting that information. So what is that information it's posting? Customer ID, item details, the payment method. This is being posted to the other application, and response is always the information that comes in return to the request. So you look at the JSON file and you should be able to cull out all of this information, because all of this information is there in that JSON file that will be given to you. Most of the companies, they don't want people sitting with the BA to make them understand what is JSON and everything. That's the reason, even in interviews nowadays, they upfront ask you that are you aware of how API documentation is done? Because nobody wants to babysit you, right? So it's as simple as it is. I've shown you what is the stuff and how, in plain simple English, you have to document. You will not be asked to code, but you should be able to read pieces of that JSON file to document it in simple language like I just showed you. So now that you have understood components of an API, let's move on to see if API documentation can be done also in the form of user stories. So that's all in this session. I will see you in the next session where we will introduce a new concept of API. Bye.